Welcome everyone to this chilling investigation into one of the most notorious criminals in recent history, Joseph James DeAngelo, the man behind the Golden State Killer. His name and crimes may already be familiar, but tonight we are diving deep into the man behind the mask, exploring his childhood, his relationships, and what might have driven him to commit such atrocities. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that the story you are about to hear contains graphic descriptions of violence and may be disturbing to sensitive viewers. Please grab a warm drink, settle by the fire, and if needed, take care of yourself as we journey into this dark chapter of criminal history. And as always, I want to thank you for supporting this channel. It means the world to me. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon to stay updated on all future stories. Sharing these stories helps keep these cases alive, and hopefully together we can continue raising awareness for unsolved and solved crimes alike. Now let's begin. Joseph James DeAngelo, born in 1945, grew up in a family dynamic that was anything but stable. Raised in a turbulent household, Joseph's early years were marked by a sense of instability and neglect. He was one of 4 children with a father who was often absent, as his military career kept him away from home for extended periods. His mother was reported to be distant, struggling to maintain the household. This emotional void and lack of consistent parental attention are believed by some psychologists to have contributed to Joseph's later criminal tendencies. There are also reports that DeAngelo may have witnessed traumatic events at a young age, such as violence or abuse within the family. These early experiences of powerlessness could have sparked a deep-seated need for control, which later manifested in his crimes. His childhood was also marked by a lack of close friendships, and many of his classmates described him as quiet and introverted, a loner who rarely interacted with others. Adding to this, it was noted that DeAngelo's behavior grew more aggressive in his teenage years. There were allegations of violent outbursts, including cruelty to animals, a common early sign in the psychological profile of serial offenders. These experiences shaped a young boy who, instead of seeking help or finding positive outlets, began harboring darker impulses. DeAngelo's later years paint a stark contrast to his violent criminal acts. After finishing school, he served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War, gaining crucial skills in stealth and strategy that he would later employ in his crimes. The structure and discipline of the military may have helped him mask his darker tendencies, but it also honed his ability to blend into society while carrying out meticulously planned crimes. After leaving the military, DeAngelo pursued a career in law enforcement, becoming a police officer in the small town of Exeter, California. As a member of the force, DeAngelo was responsible for enforcing the law, a cruel irony considering his secret life as a criminal. His job provided him with intimate knowledge of police procedures, which helped him avoid detection for decades. Many believe this insider knowledge allowed him to evade capture and gave him a sense of invincibility. This juxtaposition between his public role as a protector of society and his hidden role as a predator highlights the complexity of his double life. How could a man so trusted by his community also be capable of such horrendous acts? DeAngelo's personal life added another layer of complexity to his crimes. In 1973, he married Sharon Huddle, a law student who would later become an attorney. Together, they had 3 daughters, and from the outside, it appeared that DeAngelo was living a relatively normal suburban life. His family had no idea of the terror he was inflicting on the community at night. However, the cracks in DeAngelo's relationships began to show. Sharon filed for divorce in 1991, and his family described him as cold and distant. He reportedly had a rigid and controlling personality, a trait that aligned with his need for dominance over his victims. His relationship with his children was also reportedly strained. DeAngelo's ability to compartmentalize his life, to be a loving father and husband while committing heinous acts, baffled those who knew him. Witness accounts from neighbors also painted a picture of a man with a simmering rage beneath the surface. Despite appearing mild-mannered and polite, DeAngelo was known for sudden outbursts of anger, often over trivial matters. These glimpses into his personality foreshadowed the brutality of the Golden State Killer's attacks. DeAngelo's criminal career began in the early 1970s, starting with a series of burglaries in Visalia, California. Known as the Visalia Ransacker, he would break into homes, stealing small items and often leaving behind unsettling evidence that he had been there. Items rearranged, furniture moved, personal possessions tampered with. His actions hinted at a psychological need for control and invasion of personal space, long before he escalated to more violent crimes. His first known murder occurred in 1975, when he shot and killed Claude Snelling during a botched kidnapping attempt of Snelling's daughter. This marked a turning point for DeAngelo, as he shifted from non-violent burglaries to violent attacks. The escalation continued as he progressed from being the Visalia Ransacker to the notorious East Area Rapist and eventually the Golden State Killer. Joseph James DeAngelo's reign of terror was marked by a disturbing level of organization and careful planning. As a former police officer, he used his intimate knowledge of law enforcement procedures to avoid capture. DeAngelo would meticulously stake out his victims' homes in the days or even weeks leading up to an attack, learning their routines, tracking when they would be most vulnerable and identifying any weaknesses in their security. He would often break into homes beforehand to unlock windows, disable alarms, and leave behind items he would later use during his assaults, such as shoelaces to tie up his victims. This premeditation gave him an advantage that made it almost impossible for victims to escape once he struck. DeAngelo would also make use of trophy-taking as part of his crimes. After committing assaults, he would steal personal items such as jewelry, photographs, or even small trinkets that had sentimental value. These tokens served as reminders of his horrific acts and ensured that his presence remained in the lives of his victims long after the attack was over. He was known for leaving a psychological mark on his victims, calling them months or years after his attacks to taunt them. The infamous phrase, "I'm going to kill you," was uttered over the phone, sending shivers down the spines of those who had already survived his brutal assaults. In many of his crimes, DeAngelo used blitz-style attacks, breaking into homes during the late hours or early mornings when families were most vulnerable. His hallmark was his ability to subdue his victims swiftly and efficiently, often using weapons or threats to control them. His crimes ranged from simple break-ins to vicious murders, leaving the California suburbs paralyzed with fear. While the Golden State Killer was responsible for a vast array of assaults, burglaries, and murders, a few of his crimes stood out due to their brutality and the notoriety they gained. One of the most infamous cases associated with the Golden State Killer was the murder of Brian and Katie Maggiore in 1978. The young couple was walking their dog in Rancho Cordova, Sacramento, when they crossed paths with DeAngelo. Unlike his other victims, the Maggiores weren't in their home when they were attacked. It's believed that they unknowingly saw DeAngelo either staking out another house or in the midst of another crime. He chased them down and fatally shot both Brian and Katie when they tried to flee. Their case was unsolved for years, finally linked to DeAngelo by DNA decades later. Another case is the Harrington family murders in 1980. Lyman and Charlene Harrington were a married couple living in Dana Point, California. On August 19, 1980, DeAngelo broke into their home, restrained them and proceeded to beat them to death. The Harrington murders were particularly shocking due to the savagery of the attacks. Their deaths marked the shift from the East Area Rapist into the full-fledged Golden State Killer, where murder became a regular component of his crimes. Just months after killing the Maggiores, DeAngelo targeted another couple, Keith and Patrice Harrington. They were found bludgeoned to death in their Orange County home. Their murder sent shockwaves through the community, and their family tirelessly advocated for justice, even helping to establish the DNA database that ultimately caught DeAngelo. In 1986, Janelle Cruz, an 18-year-old, was the Golden State Killer's final known victim. On May 4, 1986, DeAngelo attacked her in her home in Irvine, California, while her family was out of town. Like many of his victims, she was brutally beaten and raped before being murdered. Cruz's death marked the end of the Golden State Killer's spree, though the fear and trauma he left behind continued to linger for decades. DeAngelo's attacks were marked by a level of brutality and violence that made them infamous throughout California. His victims were often couples, and he would tie up the male partner while assaulting the female, adding an additional layer of psychological torment to his already horrific crimes. Throughout his crime spree, DeAngelo seemed to select his victims at random, targeting both men and women of all ages. This unpredictability made him even more terrifying, as it seemed no one was safe from his wrath. For years, the identity of the Golden State Killer remained a haunting mystery, with investigators hitting one dead end after another. Despite hundreds of tips, composite sketches, and a meticulous pattern of crimes, Joseph James DeAngelo managed to evade law enforcement for over 40 years. But it wasn't traditional detective work that finally cracked the case. It was the revolutionary use of DNA technology and genetic genealogy. In the late 1990s, DNA testing had begun to make leaps in forensic science. Though the Golden State Killer had disappeared from the crime scene for decades, the DNA evidence he left behind at numerous crime scenes, particularly from sexual assaults, was meticulously preserved. By 2001, investigators confirmed that the East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person, and that DNA evidence linked at least 12 murders to the same suspect. However, despite having a DNA profile, authorities still had no name to match it. They searched through traditional criminal DNA databases, but there was no hit. DeAngelo had never been arrested for a serious crime, and without a direct match, investigators couldn't connect the dots. The game-changing moment in the case came in 2017 when investigators turned to an emerging field known as genetic genealogy. This technique involves using publicly available genetic data from genealogy websites to trace DNA back to possible family members. It had been successfully used in a few cold cases before, but never on the scale of the Golden State Killer investigation. Investigators uploaded the Golden State Killer's DNA profile to GeneMatch, a public genealogy database. This wasn't a law enforcement database, but rather a platform where individuals voluntarily submit their DNA data, typically from consumer tests like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, to explore their family trees. Within weeks, investigators found several distant relatives of the Golden State Killer. This breakthrough didn't provide an immediate answer, but it narrowed down the suspect pool significantly. By building out the family tree from these distant cousins, investigators were able to identify a potential lineage that led them to Joseph James DeAngelo. Once the focus turned to DeAngelo, detectives began a covert investigation into his life. At the time, DeAngelo was a retired police officer living a seemingly quiet suburban life in Citrus Heights, California. He was in his early 70s, a family man with children and grandchildren, and had successfully blended into his community, hiding in plain sight. Investigators quietly surveilled him, waiting for the right moment to collect a fresh DNA sample. In April 2018, they obtained a discarded item. Some reports mention a tissue from his trash, while others suggest a door handle or cup, something DeAngelo had touched that could be used to confirm his DNA against the decades-old crime scene samples. When the DNA was tested, it was an exact match to the Golden State Killer's genetic profile, conclusively linking DeAngelo to the long list of unsolved rapes and murders. On April 24, 2018, more than 40 years after his crimes began, Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested at his home in a quiet Sacramento suburb. The arrest sent shockwaves across the nation. DeAngelo, who had evaded capture for so long, was finally unmasked as one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His family and neighbors were stunned, with many describing him as a reserved, even-tempered man. However, others mentioned his odd behavior. He was known to have violent outbursts, and some neighbors recalled him shouting profanities into the night. DeAngelo's arrest marked a monumental victory for the victims, their families, and law enforcement, who had tirelessly worked to solve the case. It also signified a turning point in criminal investigations, showcasing the potential of genetic genealogy as a powerful tool in solving cold cases. When Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested in April 2018, it felt like a long-awaited moment of justice for the families of his victims. The seemingly ordinary man, a former police officer, was revealed to be the monster behind over a decade of terror in California. His neighbors were in disbelief. Some described him as quiet and reserved, while others recalled his strange outbursts of anger. After his arrest, DeAngelo faced numerous charges, including 13 murders and 13 kidnappings, though the number of rapes he committed was believed to be far higher. In 2020, rather than face a lengthy trial, DeAngelo pled guilty to the crimes, sparing the victims' families the ordeal of a prolonged legal battle. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The arrest of the Golden State Killer not only brought a sense of closure to many, but it also showcased the power of modern technology in solving even the coldest of cases. Genetic genealogy had changed the game, and DeAngelo's arrest served as a beacon of hope for countless other unsolved cases across the world. As we bring this harrowing tale of justice to a close, we are reminded of the importance of never giving up on cold cases. The capture of the Golden State Killer after decades of fear and uncertainty is proof that justice, no matter how delayed, is always possible with persistence, determination, and the relentless pursuit of the truth. If you or someone you know has been affected by a cold case or is seeking support, please check the links in the description for organizations that specialize in victim advocacy and support services. These groups are dedicated to helping families and individuals navigate the trauma that comes with these unsolved cases. It's crucial that we continue to talk about these stories. By keeping them alive in our conversations and media, we give voice to those who can no longer speak and ensure that the investigations continue in the hopes of bringing closure to the families involved. Every case deserves answers and every victim deserves justice. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative and you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Sharing these stories helps spread awareness, and it truly means the world to me and this channel. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, no matter how dark the night, the truth is always out there waiting to be uncovered.